is where I am with my mic in my hand. Kakarina, Kakarina. Ain't nobody sweeter than me, so don't forget it. Y'all, what's going on, y'all? This your girl Kakarina. Ain't nobody sweeter, so don't forget it. Aight. Now, if you missed the last episode of Ghost Stories, then after this video, you'll be able to click on the link and it'll take you to Ghost Stories episode 2. But welcome for Ghost Stories episode 3. Now, in 2008, a man who I considered a grandpa to me passed away from terminal cancer. But before that, in 2007, all year long, him and his wife helped me so much. Mr. and Mrs. Holmes were longtime friends of my mother and father, but they were both very close to me and my kids. Mr. Holmes was especially close to Squish. It's significant in that Mr. Holmes, in his young age and in his old age, was pretty reserved around children. He would often leave situations where he felt there were too many people or too many kids around. Probably because he had anxieties, or maybe he just felt suffocated being in large groups. But it was different with Squish. In 2007, I had no car. I had to run around to daycare and to work, and back to daycare, or to the grocery store, or to the doctor's appointments that I had. And Mr. Holmes was the one that I had to call. At 79 years old, without complaints, he got up early, and he stayed up late just to help me. I often felt bad, but since there was no one else that was willing or able to help me and my kids, I had to just kind of suck it up. But trust and believe that I never took it for granted. For a struggling single mom like me, it was a blessing. Every morning when Squish was 2 years old and little May was about 10 months old, Squish would look out the screen door of our house. Back then I had a duplex. And he was waiting for Mr. Holmes to walk down the walkway toward our building. And Squish would be so happy to see him, he'd jump up and say, "Mommy, Mommy, it's Mr. Holmes," and point at him. Nearly every morning for 6 months, this is what he would do. One morning Mr. Holmes wasn't feeling well, so Mrs. Holmes came and picked us up instead, and when he saw Mrs. Holmes instead of Mr. Holmes, he cried and cried and bawled and cried. He actually threw himself on the floor and had a fit, and my son never does that. It was clear to both of us that they were two peas in the pod, and Mrs. Holmes began telling me how much Mr. Holmes enjoyed Squish's company and how respectful and quiet and smart he is. So Mr. Holmes really admired my son. It continued like this until Mr. Holmes began to die. When he told me he wouldn't be able to drive me around anymore because he was dying, I didn't take it very well. I love him very much, and I loved him then, and so did Squish, and I didn't know how to tell him. How do you tell a 2-year-old that his best friend is dying? So I didn't. The next couple of mornings, Squish asked me where Mr. Holmes was, and I told him as best that I could that Mr. Holmes wasn't feeling well and he couldn't come. Well, after months of struggling with the pain, in early May, Mr. Holmes called me and said it was time for everybody to say goodbye. Instead of being in a hospital, we went to their home, and I brought Squish and little May, and I met my mother and my sister Lexi there. I let Squish up onto Mr. Holmes's bed, and he hugged him, and he told Squish how much he loved him and how happy he had made his last year. Squish didn't understand, but he told Mr. Holmes he loved him too, and that he would see him in the morning when he felt better. I tried not to cry. I'm trying not to cry as I tell this story. what I was supposed to... I mean, what was I supposed to tell Squish? I just couldn't explain it. After a couple of months, Squish didn't mention Mr. Holmes anymore. But then one night I woke up because I heard Squish talking to himself. I'm a light sleeper, so... he was speaking loudly, as if he was having a conversation with somebody. And I thought that maybe he had been, that he had been dreaming. And there was no one else in the house but me, so it wasn't as if there was any kind of noise that could wake him up. So I asked Squish if he was okay, and I asked him why he woke up, and he pointed to the left of me, behind me, and he said, "Mr. Holmes says I am too hot." I looked at him like, what are you talking about? You know, obviously Mr. Holmes had already passed. But I wrapped my arms around him to hug him so I could tuck him back into bed. And my cheek rested against his forehead, and it actually shocked me how hot his skin was. So I rushed to check his temperature, and he was 104 degrees. So I began to panic, and I called my cousin, who lived like right next door to me. And I called my mother, and we got squished to the hospital, which luckily was right across the street from where I lived. Obviously, Squish is fine now, but this is why I like to believe that those that are dear to us never stop looking out for us, nor do they ever stop loving us or forget about us. I'll always be grateful to Mr. Holmes for looking out for Squish that night. He didn't have to, and he was the type of person that was a Christian man, not necessarily religious. He always said that he hated religion, but he loved the Lord. And he could have very well just passed on and had been done with the real world, but I believe that he needed to tell me to take care of Squish, and that's what he did. Again, I appreciate everybody watching the video and listening to me tell these stories. They're not really easy to tell. They're my personal experiences, and I'm not trying to get anybody to believe in the same things that I do. So if you don't believe in ghosts, or you don't believe in the supernatural, the unexplained, things like that, that's perfectly fine. But this is just my way of talking about things that I can't explain, and maybe getting some feedback from you guys. So I really do appreciate it. Friends, loves, butt faces, until next time. Hey guys, KKRena here. If you missed the previous vid, you can check it out now. And if you want more of me, don't forget to subscribe.
Been here so long, but I'm waiting for you.
I'm waiting for you.
Holding my breath till our love pulls me
Boy,
through.
I don't even
All
breathe
that
no
I've
more.
given and all that you said,
Wasn't what
I
you
won't
told
want